Okay, so 2.5 years later, I've had this camera since July of 2022. What do I think of the Leica M9? I felt like it was time for an update video. I made a video a couple of years ago talking about sort of how I thought the Leica M9 was the perfect transition camera from somebody coming from analog to digital. I just thought that the M9 shared so many of the same similarities. It kind of had its own look with the CCD sensor. And I just felt like if you're someone coming from film and you're like, oh, I just can't afford to shoot film, anymore. I just felt like the Leica M9 was sort of like the perfect camera to bridge that gap, and I still think so today. But first, I kind of just felt like I should talk about some of the things that I love about this camera because I think there are many of them. And it's also just, this is probably going to be a complicated video because there's just lots of like mixed feelings after having this camera for 2.5 years, and also like running it alongside all of my other cameras. There's just like lots of thoughts bubbling around in my head, and I just felt like it was time for an update. Obviously, the reason why everybody buys this camera is because of its CCD sensor. Since making my first video about the M9, I've had a lot of people from the M10 and M11 user community tell me how they can get the special look that the M9 has, and all it is editing, or you set up a preset in Lightroom and it can instantly get like M9 colors. And I mean, there's probably some validity to that, but I think that there's just something magical that you just can't point to in the Leica M9. Those people probably just either haven't shot the M9, or if they have, might have not kind of given it like a fair shake, because I think that sometimes when you hit this in the right light, in all the right conditions, when everything just lines up magically, there's this look that this camera just provides that I've never seen in any other camera. And I stand by that. The CCD sensor really does have a little bit of magic, and I guess it just depends on, if you like magic or not. But with that CCD sensor, there's some drawbacks. Obviously, the ISO performance is going to be less good compared to a traditional modern CMOS sensor. So this is actually my third M9 in the last 2.5 years, mostly because I just wanted a silver one. So that's kind of how it led me to have three different M9s over the last 2.5 years. But one of them, and this was the middle one, it actually suffered from like a dead pixel problem, which is quite common with CCD sensors. It's something that you don't hear talked about online all that much. There are some like dead pixel areas that you need to be aware of. The one that I had actually had a sort of line down the side of the images that was just kind of like a dead area of pixels. It was so tiny and you could only really see it when you like zoomed in super close and you were pixel peeping a little bit. But nevertheless, it was there, and it's just something to be aware of. I think you can remap the pixels. I think you have to send it away to Leica, and I wasn't really willing to do that. So I sold it at a bit of a loss and then purchased this one. And then I've had this one ever since, no problems. Overall, most of them are so small and so insignificant that you'll likely even just not even know that they're there. But the second one that I had, it was kind of significant, and I had like a workaround where on Photoshop preset, I had an action where it just removed that pixel, that line, that dead line. Not ideal, and it is quite common with CCD sensors, and there's a bunch of science behind it. I'm not a scientist, but just know that it is likely something that could happen with CCD sensors. One of the other main draws for the Leica M9 for me is sort of just the look and feel of the camera. I think it's sort of like the perfect blend from what I love about a Leica M camera. If you've been watching this channel a while, you're obviously probably familiar that I am a Leica MP shooter. For me, that's the base level of how I think of Leica M cameras. And out of the digital M lineup, the Leica M9 is really sort of the closest that I've found to that analog experience. Even the M9 with a screen, I felt, is still a more analog experience than something like the M10D, definitely any of the M10 series or M11 series cameras. Call me a little crazy, but there's something charming about a camera that's sort of like not absolutely perfect and easy to use. I know that's like silly because we all want our tools to work and we all want to use good cameras. I'm no exception to that, but I also think that there is some like, I don't know, something charming about a camera that's just sort of trying its best. One of the things that that also means is that it's kind of a low megapixel count in today's standards. 18 megapixels is like, you can't really buy a modern camera with less than 18 megapixels today. You know, my GR3 has over 20, and then all my other cameras have like over 40. That is actually something though that I really appreciate. It will take me like hours to transfer some of my files from the A7R5 onto my computer, and it takes like no more than 5 minutes ever with the Leica M9. Obviously, of course, it depends on the amount of images you're transferring, etc. But I think like you're not going to shoot this camera the same way you would shoot an A7R5. With the A7R5, I might have 1,000 photos of like, you know, 2 scenes. With the M9, I would have like, you know, maybe 100 maximum. I think you obviously shoot the camera differently, but all that aside, working with 18 megapixel files is just beautiful. I think like it's a perfect camera for printing. People obviously like really want resolution, and obviously, you know, I sort of like having resolution as well in my cameras. That's why I have the A7R5. But I don't think it's necessary, and I particularly don't think it's necessary with the Leica M digital camera. What you're using a Leica for typically isn't sports, it isn't weddings. I mean, it's not to say that you can't use them for that, but you're kind of like doing your clients a disservice, in my opinion, to just use like an M11 at their wedding when there are so many modern cameras available for so much cheaper that will function so much better, especially from an autofocus perspective, from a speed perspective. And I don't know, I think it's a great secondary camera, but I think the M9 is a great secondary camera. So that's just something to think about. I really love having 18 megapixel files. I just find them so fun and easy to work with. When you're used to working with cameras that have 60 megapixels, having 18 is a breeze and a much nicer workflow experience. So I've kind of mentioned already that this camera isn't a very modern experience, and just to dig sort of a little bit deeper into that, like this camera, it doesn't have Bluetooth. It has a really bad sort of back screen. And so you use the screen so much differently than you would use it on a modern camera. You're not looking at every fine detail. You're kind of just looking, is the exposure okay? And do I hope it's sharp? Because it's very hard to tell if your image is sharp on the screen. Some people might find that a drawback, and I understand that. But part of, I think, what I'm really looking for in my M experience is the presence that they give you. You know, when I shoot my MP, I am like shooting, but I'm still so encapsulated in the present moment that I'm like not really distracted by the camera. I find that feeling very addicting when you're just like in the moment, immersed, and you're sort of able to just take a picture and not even think about whether or not it worked. You're just take a picture, move on, keep going. Don't let it kind of pull you out of whatever the experience is that you're having. And I find the M9 does that quite well. It doesn't really pull you out of the experience of shooting the way that M10s or M11s did for me, at least. That is kind of like the main reason why I think some of my like best family moments have been captured on the M9, because it's like not obtrusive. It never really like felt like it was pulling me out of the moment. And I found that with my kids and with my family, that's just kind of exactly what you're after, is something that's just like take a picture, move on, stay in the moment. Don't give up the moment because you're busy with photography. Use your camera in a way that sort of just is able to preserve the moment, but doesn't destroy the moment, if that makes sense. I don't know. And then, of course, the Bluetooth thing, I just guess I wasn't strong enough not to use Bluetooth with the Leica M10D, because I found myself using it all the time. And like the thing that I noticed I was doing was like, let's say I was out shooting. Once I got to like the coffee shop or something and took a break from shooting, I would immediately open up the Leica app, pair it to the phone, and then just start browsing my photos. And with the Leica M9, I'm sure with the Leica M240 and, you know, MD262, it not having Bluetooth really sort of just makes that impossible. While you're out in the field, you're not ever thinking about how are my photos looking? How are they feeling? Can I look at them immediately? Do I share them right away? And so in some regard, you sort of delay that instant gratification in the same way that you do with film. Although obviously to a lesser extent, you know, sometimes you're waiting a couple of weeks, sometimes in my case, months, to develop rolls of film. And once you get those images back, you have this like feeling. And then once you get a banger in those images that you took from, you know, 2 months ago, that banger just feels so much bigger to you than a digital photo would. And I think it's part of this gratification process of just you have kind of been anticipating for X amount of time what that image might have looked like. You might have even forgot that you took that image. And so the big surprise, the grand reveal at the end is something that's just it's part of the joy of photography. And you do sort of get that experience with the Leica M9. I've taken this camera traveling. I've taken it to the lake, obviously, like every weekend in the summer. And I never sort of get to look at the photos until I'm back home. I'm just focused on shooting. And again, as I mentioned earlier, focused on just being in the moment. Yeah, it's just a really special thing that I think is very undervalued with the Leica M9. And probably the M240 and 262 series as well, is just that it doesn't have Bluetooth and it really allows you to focus on the joy of picture making, the act of photography itself. And so, all that to say, as much as I love this camera and as meaningful as it has been to the last 2.5 years of my personal life, I'm going to be selling it and it's going to be moving on to someone else who will get to sort of live the experience that I've lived in the last 2.5 years. I think that there are a couple of contributing factors to why I ultimately decided that despite the fact that I really love this camera, and I really do love this camera, there are a couple of things that has sort of led me to make this decision. One of them being obviously I just have lots of cameras and I just don't know that it's always necessary. You know, sometimes I feel like it's almost a bit of paralysis having so many cameras. There are a couple of reasons, things that people need to know about this camera that I think don't really get talked about that much, at least not in the M9 videos that I've seen on YouTube or the sort of M9 rhetoric online in general. You'll see mostly people talking about just how magical this camera is or how shitty it is. I am definitely in the magical camp, but I'm also realistic with what this camera is not for. It's minus 44 outside right now in Saskatoon, Canada, and this camera would never even come close to working in minus 44 weather. To be honest, most of my cameras would probably struggle with this older sort of tech. Like these have lithium ion batteries, and when they get cold, they don't provide enough electric currents to power the camera properly. Things kind of get sticky with the M9, and it just doesn't operate very well in cold weather. I don't really have like a temperature that you can shoot it at because I've definitely taken it outside in the winter and have been able to use it, but have noticed that the batteries, it's not necessarily the batteries like dying, it's that the batteries aren't able to supply the current needed to power the camera and make it function the way that it would if it was in a normal environment. And I can honestly say that I've had that experience with all three of my Leica M9s. It just doesn't work that well in cold weather. And that means for me, that's like 5 to 6 months where I can't use this camera. I think just the reliability in changing weather is sort of a problem for me. You know, I have the Q2M, which is sort of like how I look at it as my weatherproof Leica camera. The MP as well, like I can be outside and I can shoot that in the winter. The M9, I just don't feel comfortable. I don't feel like I can trust it. It wouldn't be the only camera that I bring out. From a reliability perspective, I mean, they're just old cameras, and that's something that I think doesn't really get talked about all that much. People talk about the sensor corrosion and the issues from the original Leica M9 sensors to make sure that you buy one with a new sensor or with the low pass filter replacement. Yes, I think that's good advice. I think if you're gonna buy an M9 in 2025, buy one with a new sensor, or at the very least, buy one with that low pass filter replaced by Kalari. But not a lot of people talk about its reliability issues in terms of cold weather, in terms of just battery tech in general being that old, and the fact that you can't really buy new Leica M9 batteries. I think you can buy like new old stock batteries, but I don't think they still make Leica M9 batteries. I could be wrong. These are just things that I really wanted to sort of get into this video because I think it's very easy to talk about all of the beautiful, amazing things about a machine like this, and sort of overlook these sort of bigger reliability issues, which for me, honestly, these are big issues. You know, I can't really use this camera outside for half of the year. So that's just something to consider. And so just to wrap this up, I mean, obviously, I really love the Leica M9P. I've made some of my most meaningful photos that I've made in the last 2.5 years have been made on this camera. It has been sort of, I would say, my most meaningful and special dad cam. I think that if I was to try and figure out who a camera like this is actually for, I have sort of a couple of thoughts. One of them, like obviously the Leica community, especially here on YouTube, is growing. They just had their best year ever in terms of sales and performance, which I think is great. I love Leica cameras. A lot of the videos that I've made on this channel have been dedicated to just how much I love these cameras. I see a lot of people selling up all of their camera gear just to buy a Leica camera. I don't exactly think that that's a good idea. I don't think that young photographers with, you know, limited capital should be wasting that money on luxury items like Leica. And when I say wasting, I want to be careful because I think Leica is a good investment. I think it holds its value better than any other camera brand. I don't necessarily think it's wrong if you choose to spend your money on Leica cameras, but I do think that like it's a little crazy to sell all of your cameras just to enter into either the Leica Q system or the Leica M system. Modern cameras are just way better. Like they're just better in every way. Like a Canon or a Sony, like a Sony A1 or an A1 II is going to blow all of the Leica cameras combined out of the water in terms of performance and making an image. It just seems crazy to me to see all these younger people spend all of their money on one Leica camera without considering some of the drawbacks of these cameras. Like if you want the M9, save up for it or use money that you earn from making images or making videos to pay for one. Don't use your rent money on it. Don't go into debt to buy it. Don't sell all of your current gear just to be sort of in with the cool kids, because that's kind of what it feels like lately, is just this community. While I love it and I love how it's growing, I really do love to see it growing, I just don't like necessarily seeing kids spending all of their money on Leica cameras just to be cool. And I mean, I'm not going to tell anyone how to spend their money. Especially, you know, I've spent a lot of money on Leica gear, so I'm not going to sit here and judge you or anything like that. But I do want to just make that point because I think, you know, these are beautiful cameras and there's a ton of drawbacks. If you are an enthusiast, which I kind of classify myself as a photography enthusiast, yes, I make money by making films and by taking pictures, and I have a photography business, etc. But I really feel in my heart that I'm an enthusiast and I just really enjoy. I would be making images and, you know, wanting to play with cameras regardless of if I was making $0. And so I was able to somewhat afford a cool enthusiast camera collection when I was in the corporate world. And now that I've sort of left, I really just kind of don't know that this fits into that. I think that there are a ton of other ways that I could spend $3,400 in regards to camera tech, getting a better computer. I mean, there's a million ways to spend $3,400 when you have your own business. I'm not going to sell my Leica MP. I'm not going to sell my Leica Q2M, at least not yet. It was a beautiful almost 3 years together. I really do love this camera, and I hope that one day it finds its way back into my life. I think that this camera is for somebody who can afford it, and that's it. I don't think it really should be considered a camera that you would use professionally. You probably could use it, at least as a secondary camera, but just from a reliability standpoint, it's just a little bit too old for me to recommend that you can use it professionally. But personally, it's one of the best. My son's whole life was captured on this camera, and I think it's just always going to be meaningful to me just because of that. So it depends on who you are, what you shoot. I can't make that decision for you, but here are my thoughts. And I hope you got something of value from this video. Feel free to leave a comment. If you have a question about the Leica M9, I'd be happy to answer it. And we'll catch you in the next one. Hopefully it's warmer. Hopefully it's a little bit warmer. Okay. All right. Bye-bye.